All right, one more minute and then we'll go. All right, I'm going to get started just because it is 3:18 and I know we all have lives outside of what we do here. So I said it earlier before everybody came in, to those that were here. I have a 12-pound dog who's very upset that she is locked in another room. And so you may hear her make some noises that sound like she's being abused. She is not. She's just unhappy that there might be voices in my house and she doesn't know what's going on. So I also have a gentleman cleaning my boiler. So there's quite a bit going on here today. So anyway, welcome everybody. So this is our first meeting. I sent out an agenda I guess it was early this morning. I tend to lose track of time these days. I think it was like probably 5:30 this morning. But I want to start, and this is our first meeting. Obviously, as things come up, we'll meet again. We just have some things to discuss today. Kathy and I kind of talked about it. It's not a lot necessarily to vote on, but just some things to talk through a bit. I want to start with welcome. We did that and introductions. And I think it's important that when we do our introductions, we share our role here. It's hard in Zoom doing introductions, who goes next, because everybody's screen looks the same. So what we'll do is I'll go first, and then I will call on somebody to go next, and we'll keep that process going. It's just kind of an easier way to do it. So for those of you who don't know me, or I think most of you do, I'm Andy Carlton. I'm the superintendent of schools in RSU 4. My role here is nothing more than facilitation. So I am here to help set an agenda, facilitate the meeting, and then we'll do some reporting to the board once and actually Christy is here and she'll do some of that as well. So I guess I will pass it along to Crystal.
Hey guys, I am Crystal Cloutier, and my role in this team is representing the middle school. So I am the 8th grade science teacher at the middle school, and it's nice to see you all and meet some of you.
Crystal, who are you calling on next?
Oh, it's going to be okay. I'm going to call on Kathy Martin next.
Hi, I'm Kathy Martin. I am the Director of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. I also oversee a lot of I don't know if you call me a COVID coordinator. I oversee a lot of the COVID implications. So my role here is to kind of see how COVID expectations and operating procedures affect curriculum assessment and instruction. How about Eric?
I'm Eric Daniels. I'm a parent. I guess that's my role here. I have a 5-year-old at kindergarten at Libby Tozier, and a 3-year-old who will be starting pre-K in the fall, I guess. So that's me. It's like the next person would be Jen Williams.
Hi, I'm Jen Williams. I'm the art teacher at Carrie Ricker. So I guess I'll call on Marco.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Marco Aliberti. I'm the principal at Oak Hill High School. Happy to be here representing the administrative team. Let's see, next up looks like Jeremy. Why don't you go ahead?
Thanks. I'm Jeremy Young, and I'm here representing the high school teachers. Let's go to, I don't know who's next. Christy Willett.
That's me. Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Willett. I am on the board. I'm a non-voting member of this group, and my role is to bring back all of this good work to the board. Thank you all for taking the time to do this. And I'm going to call on Amy.
Hi, my name's Amy McDonough, and I am the parent of a middle school 8th grader.
Amy, who would you like to call on next?
How about, who hasn't gone yet? Can you raise a hand? Because I'm losing track now since I'm in the middle. About Heather.
So my name is Heather Libby. I'm a teacher at Soatis Primary School. And then I'm also co-president of our Teachers Association. Or, yeah. Allie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allie Casares. I'm an ed tech in Michelle Wilkins pre-K classroom. So my role here is to represent Libby Tozier. Great to see you all. I will call on Betsy.
Hi, I'm Betsy Haskell, and I'm a parent to 3 kids. 2 are currently school-aged, and the youngest is approaching pre-K next year. Thanks so much for doing this.
Betsy, who would you like to call on next?
Let me see if I can, I can't really see the name, so I'm going by the email. Has Hannah gone? Oh, Hannah just did,
Hannah has not gone.
Hannah, okay, sorry, Hannah, I guess I was right.
Hi, I'm Hannah Dietrich. I am a parent of a first grader. I also have 2 other children, but they're not school aged yet. So yeah, that's my role, is just a parent. Call on Megan, because I familiar face.
All right, my name is Megan Brown. I have 4 kids total, 2 of which are in school. I have a pre-K-er and a first grader.
Megan, would you like to call on someone, or I'll pick? Ooh, we lost you. I think you're muted.
Oh, there we go. Do we have anybody else that hasn't? No.
Yeah, Ames hasn't gone.
Hi there, I'm Ames Dennis, and I have 2 kids at the high school, so I'm here as a parent.
All right, and I think last but certainly not least is Jody.
Hi, I'm Jody Gray, and I am the nurse at the middle school.
Awesome. Well, thank you all, and thank you all for giving up your time to do this. You know, I think a lot of what we do, it's important to understand a lot of it goes on behind the scenes, and your willingness to volunteer to do this is certainly doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you. Next, we need to talk just briefly about norms. This is a big group, and I think it's important that we have some things to operate under. I actually put together a list of some norms. I may have stolen these from our A-team norms, but I wanted to share those with you now, and then see if anybody else has anything they'd like to add to it, just to give us a kind of a framework. So I'm going to share my screen. So if you can see, can everybody see my screen? So these are what we call our professional working conditions when we work as an administrative team. I thought they were pretty similar with what maybe we needed here. And certainly if anybody else has anything they'd like to add, I'm all ears. Be present. So what that means is be involved in the conversation, listen to what's going on, use active listening skills. Love every idea for at least 30 seconds. So that's one of those situations where, you know, somebody has an idea, we tend to jump on the no, that's not it, or yes, it is. Just giving ideas a minute just to maybe percolate in our brains to see, you know, where we stand on it. Be respectful. You know, we expect our students to be respectful. I hope we can hold ourselves accountable to being respectful to one another. Assuming best intentions. I mean, we're all here because we love kids. And so I thought that one was pertinent. And then, you know, for me, start and end on time. Although Kathy will tell you, if I get a microphone in front of me, it may not. I struggle. So she holds me accountable on that one. So does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? You want to raise your hand? No? Nothing? Anybody else? So can you do me a favor? If we're good with those norms, just give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Well, that was an easy one. All right. So we did have an agenda for today. I think it's important you all know I did publicize this meeting. It is on the website. And I will record it, and it is recording now and will be put out onto the website. One of the things with a board committee is that we do publicize it. Certainly members of the public are welcome to join us, but they do not have the ability to speak during this meeting. One of the things that we will be doing moving forward is probably doing this in what I call the webinar version of Zoom. So we'll have the ability to have all of you in the Zoom having conversation, and anybody who wants to watch will actually be in what we call a waiting room. The legislature uses that model. It seems to work pretty well. So that the next time we meet, we'll use that. But this is getting recorded and will get put on the website. There will be minutes that I will take from this meeting and post them as well. So the first thing on our agenda was contact tracing, and Kathy kind of said it right. She's our COVID coordinator to some degree. Even when in my personal life I have questions about COVID-19, I call Kathy, even though I live with a nurse, because I think my wife would tell you she knows more about COVID than she does. Kathy and I talked briefly about an agenda for today. So, number one thing on the list is contact tracing. So I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Yeah, so since our last CPT of the other structure, we've had 2 updates from the main DOE. So for those of you that are new to this kind of process and where our guidelines come from, so we actually follow 2 schools of thought. The first one is the US CDC gives us guidelines of the mitigation strategies. So you might see in the news a lot about like the changes in recommendations of masks or the cleaning, and all of those kind of things come from, so mitigation strategies come from the US CDC. We have to follow when we have a positive case. The main CDC gives us a standard operating procedure. So that is how we have to handle case by case. That has been revised twice. Once it was revised on 12/29, and then the last iteration was on January 11th. They came out. So I will say that changes that have happened in the last couple of weeks are quite significant in some of the things that has had impacted us as schools. For some things, it's really positive in terms of, Jody will probably, I've never seen her smile so much in the last couple of weeks because it's a lot of good news in terms of the workload. So schools were still doing a heavy lift for the CDC in terms of contact tracing and those phone calls. And one of the biggest changes here was because we are universally masked, we no longer needed to do contact tracing. So the school of thought is once you leave your house, you're probably going to come in contact with someone in some capacity and be a close contact. We were ultimately contacting parents daily, sometimes multiple times of a day, for how they were a close contact for students. So that was a huge lift for us in terms of not contact tracing. What that means in terms of us reporting is we're no longer calling parents to let them know that they are a close contact. On our dashboard, we are no longer able to say, because of universal masking, how many people would not be in quarantine at the end of the month. So that we won't be able to do that for January. And it also kind of changes how they determine outbreak status. So that was another major change. I won't go too much unless Andy is okay with me going off the agenda. So in terms of outbreak status, it's about number of cases. So before it used to be 3 or more. And so if you remember the beginning of the school year, we had that color code system, and 3 or more ended up warranting a call from the CDC to kind of determine if you were in outbreak status. Currently, we are going back to our original infectious disease criteria, which is 15% of your students or staff are currently sick. So that's a huge change. That also means we have to be very clear when students or staff are calling out that we are getting really specific about, are they asymptomatic or symptomatic? So in your household, you might have a child that is showing symptoms, they would be sick, but a child that is asymptomatic would not be counting, even though they might be in quarantine, would not be part of that outbreak because they are not actually sick. So they're contagious with COVID, but they're not actually sick in terms of outbreak. So that's a little bit confusing. But we actually have to do 15% of the school population is absent due to illness. So once that does that, we have a report to CDC, and then we have to follow the mitigation strategies that they suggest or recommend or require, depending on the level of our percentage. So for at the point of contact tracing, at this point, we're no longer making phone calls. We are no longer charting, we are only charting positive cases. And we won't be able to update the board or the dashboard on that. If we choose, if the board or the CPT team decided to not go to universal masking, we would have to kind of go back, and that would change our criteria. So one of the reasons why we don't have to do contact tracing is because we're universally masked. So that is kind of a contingency. That was a lot of information. So any questions about that?
Is there any point in tracking any numbers besides just the positive COVIDs? And you mentioned early on that with us going to, or eliminating the contact tracing, there's now going to be the elimination of keeping statistics of how many close contacts we have, how many this we have. Is there any need for anything like that, or does it not really matter on where we stand?
It really wasn't a need. It was more about, Eric, if you could just maybe mute yourself, because I'm thinking I'm hearing the feedback, sorry. It was really about helping the CDC identify their close contact and their tracing. I think one of the pieces of the change is because they've changed funding and how many people can are working for the CDC. And so they don't want all this information. So they don't want 1,000 emails of negative and positive. They just want the positive, so then they can do their case. So, you know, just like we were spending, okay, so let me give an example of like one morning at the high school. Last Thursday, we had a 5 positive pools. So it was 5 different pools come back positive. We had to retest 75 students. Through the testing, during that process, other students had come down sick saying, I'm not feeling good, can I get tested? And so through that morning, we had found 8 positive students. Before contact tracing, we would have had to contact trace all those 8 cases, as well as make phone calls, you know, give the form. We would have to process those 75 tests into the system, as well as 2 reports for each of those positive. The amount of work for just that morning was just really challenging for our nursing staff. And I'm sure, and that was just one snapshot. So by allowing us just to do the positive cases, we're now just doing the 1 report of the positive case and then kind of moving on with the day. So we can really focus on the kids that are ill, our kids that, you know, have high needs. And so it really kind of focuses our attention on the work that really needs to be and supporting our students and staff that need it.
Other questions related to contact tracing? Jeremy.
So as part of contact tracing, we've been doing seating charts. And certainly as a teacher, I've been trying not to do group activities, trying to keep kids so that if Marco comes to my door and says, where was this kid? I don't have to try and remember a day before, 2 days before, whatever. if we're not doing contact tracing anymore, do we need to worry about seating charts the same way we have? Can we go back to some of those other sort of jigsaw kind of things? Where would we be on those kinds of educational processes?
Yeah, so two parts to the answer here. So no, we don't technically need to do seating charts because we're not contact tracing. We're that student. So before we would take a positive student and follow them through the day and pretend there was like a 6-foot bubble around them and who was in contact with that child. So no, we don't need seating charts in terms of contact tracing at this point in time, right? However, one of the mitigation strategies when you're asking about what are some of the curriculum or instructional activities can you do, it's still recommended, right, that students are still social distancing, still as much as possible facing in the same direction. Those kind of things are still recommended. So, right, so the US CDC is still recommending some of those basic mitigation strategies, but the main CDC is saying we don't need to do seating charts to contact trace currently because we're universally masked. So I know that's two answers for the same question. Sorry.
Jeremy, did that answer your question?
In so much as it means we have conflicting advice. Yes.
Yes. Yep.
So to Jeremy's point, Kathy, previously the main DOE recommended 3 feet of spacing and the CDC recommended 6. I don't see in the SOP where they have any distancing requirement in the current revision.
Yeah, so in the definition on page 7 of the new, it does say a close contact is 6 feet and they got rid of the 3 feet in the main CD. Yeah, I actually looked at that. I had a feeling you were going to ask me that.
Oh, good.
I think to Jeremy's point, it's a great one. We have conflicting answers to the same question. And I think this is something we've all been struggling with throughout this entire process. So, all right, more about contact tracing. Kathy, anything else?
No. Jody, did I miss anything? No.
Anybody else have questions or comments or concerns regarding contact tracing? No? Okay, I will move on then. Next one, bus and outside.
So this one is quick and easy. So one of the major changes is that anyone outdoors or on a bus is no longer considered a close contact of a positive case. Ultimately, because we're not contact tracing, because we're universally masked, this doesn't really apply to us, but it's pretty much, I think it's about a mentality and saying it's safe to be on a bus. It's safe to be outside. And so if we were to not be universally masked, this would be more applicable, but because we're universally masked, this one doesn't really necessarily apply to us because we're not contact tracing.
It was interesting to me, and I'll just share this, when we originally started down this path, the bus was an interesting scenario where we had to have a window open in the back and a window open in the front. That guidance changed, and now the bus is removed totally. So I had actually asked this question before of the Department of Ed, and nobody could quite give me an answer regarding the bus. So it was good to see this come out of the SOP altogether. So questions about the bus? Comments, concerns? No? Okay. Outbreak status and attendance reporting.
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to that is we're now, so, prior to COVID, schools had to report any infectious diseases or if we had attendance that was over 15%. So that's always been in place. So now we're going back to that same plan. So if we have 15%, oops, sorry, the lights turned off. 1 second.
Those are those fancy new lights.
Yeah, it's going to get really dark pretty quick. So if we have 15% of our students out or 15% of our staff out in a particular building or department, so like busing or, Oak Hill High School, for example, we would be considered outbreak status, which would allude to a report. So it is students or staff that are exhibiting symptoms. It does not necessarily need to be about COVID. So we would have to break it down. So it's students or staff that are sick. We do have flu, influenza. We've had people who test positive for influenza. That is still a thing that is still going around. We also have students and staff that are sick with COVID, as well as some other respiratory things that are going on. If that all adds up to that 15%, it would warrant an outbreak status. And at that point, the CDC, we get a fancy person, that coordinator or manager that helps us to mitigate and get out of that outbreak status. They would put us into that for 14 days at least, but they might extend that time depending on how long our numbers stay above 15%. That has started on January 12th. And I will say we've had at least one building every single day that could be reported to an outbreak status since we started.
So,
which is one of the reasons why we're at where we're at this week.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to touch on that real quick. As you all know, I made the decision yesterday to close school today. And then I was closed school today, partially because we were just running really short staffed everywhere. And one of the areas was food service, and trying to get meals out was darn near impossible. And so we put our heads together today, and we did make the decision to go fully remote.
Yeah, we currently have 3 departments right now in an outbreak status.
Yeah.
So our shortage of staff, and it's not just COVID, it's all kinds of things, like I said, but the combination of all the illnesses allow us to have to rethink about how we're going to move forward and making sure our staff and our students are healthy.
And I think I apologize for that. My 8-year-old just got home from school. But I think it's important to note, I don't make these decisions lightly, as you all know. The last thing I want to do is put students out of school. I think the number one place they need to be is in school. But we are not healthy right now. And so I looked at this as an opportunity to take 4 or 5 days to get us healthy, to try to come back a little better. Like Kathy said, we've got 3 departments that are pushing the envelope there. So that's why I made the decision that I did. It's not ideal. I know it's not ideal. I know it's hard. But what I don't want to see happen is us be so short-staffed that we even can't do things like deliver meals, make meals, things like that. So hopefully the next couple of days we can mitigate some things and get back to a little healthier on Monday. So questions about Eric? Go ahead.
Now, is this 15% the district-wide, or is it based on each individual building?
Each individual building. So I run a report every morning that has the students, and then I run a report that runs the staff. And so if it's over that threshold, I actually run a report to make sure it flags me if it's 10% and then flags me if it's 15. Once it gets to 10%, starting to work with administration, and we trained secretaries last week about, not just asking parents, like, don't just tell us your kid's sick, but what are those sick symptoms? Because we actually have to report like respiratory, GI, COVID. The amount of the CDC, when you get to outbreak status, the information is pretty detailed, down to if you had COVID, which kind of test did you take, antigen, or PCR. So the amount of information we have to gather. So we're, asking parents, instead of just telling us you're not feeling good, kind of tell us what your symptoms are. So we can kind of mitigate and kind of figure out those next steps. Or are they asymptomatic, right? Are you just staying home because you're asymptomatic or being cautious? Because we do have some parents that are choosing that. If you are choosing to quarantine, but you're not sick, that doesn't count in our 15%. So we really need to, be as specific as possible about why kids or staff are out. And if we don't know, then they go into that 15%. So we definitely want to be as specific as possible.
Jeremy.
Coming back to a minute ago, and I guess you mentioned, kids staying out of school because their parents are trying to be safe with them. We're a different district than Lewiston, certainly, but one of my frustrations with Lewiston has been getting information from them concerning their numbers. I guess I just wonder if we're no longer contact tracing, and certainly it's a crazy amount of work to do so, does that lessen the amount of information parents would want to have on their end?
So most of the time we know when kids are out. I mean, our secretaries do a nice job. Our nurses are tracking anytime they came down with, to the nurse's office. All of that is tracked. I think we're running like 18 spreadsheets. It's more of the absences unexcused that end up being when we don't hear from a parent or don't hear from a student. And so that's where we're asking for everyone to make an effort to make sure you call the school and let us know what's going on. We want to support you in any way, whether it's remote learning or if you're sick, about next steps, about returning safely. But we certainly need to know. So that's more, I think, Jeremy, where I'm kind of getting to is more of that absence unexcused. But for the most part, if there is a question, the nurses do a nice job of following up.
Anything else related to outbreak status? Yep, Chrissy.
I guess my mind always goes to how are we educating families to know that they need to do this, right? So like if the secretary or whomever I speak to or the voicemail that I leave a message at SPS that I'm keeping my kids home because I have COVID, like how can we prompt that so folks know how they can give us the data that we need? So that's just because I don't think that that's common knowledge among parents.
Honestly, you're absolutely right. So this is a new practice because it used to be okay just to rate sick. So going forward, just the change happened last Wednesday. And so it was more about training our secretaries and training our admin and training our nurses of like how we're going to start tracking that. The next was to have this meeting to kind of start spreading that word, as well as when we send out a notification of here are the updates, that will be part of that. But I do think it is a new change to get as specific as possible. I think we're already doing that, and parents, get the auto call when they're out, so they do get prompted to call back. But it's just we're asking for a courtesy call, like let us know how your kid is doing, or if there's something going in the home that we can support. We just want to know that information. So I think this is like the first step to that PR process. I think that we're headed to.
Well, one of the things that needs to happen is once, like Kathy alluded to, once we've had this meeting, we need to put out the communication regarding this stuff. But I wanted us to start here first. Again, it's one of those things where the moving target, the 15% target, we have to get really clear on what those are, and so communication with parents is key. So. More regarding outbreak status. Kathy, do you have anything more there? No? Anybody else have questions, comments, concerns? No? All right. Quarantine rules. Having just lived this myself, this has been interesting as well.
Yeah. So again, this is one of the biggest changes. And I also think, I'm kind of smirking because I'm looking at Jody's face as I say this. This is really probably going to be the most challenging one of when do I get out of my quarantine? And so it's, you get to do this if, you get to do this if. And so when in doubt, call the school before you get out. So if you are a positive case, you have to, quarantine period is now 5 days instead of 10 if, right? So there are some qualifying factors here. So there's some differences that we need to talk about. So if you have asymptomatic, you can do the 5 days. And if you're feeling good, you can come back. If you are symptomatic, it is recommended that you have resolving symptoms. So you have to do day 5. So on day 6, you are welcome back if you have resolving symptoms. If you if you have access to a test, you are supposed to take an antigen test, so an at-home test, to see if you're negative in order to come back on day 6. If you are negative, you get to come back. If you're positive, you do the full 10 days. That's the tough one, right? It's access to tests. It's if you are symptomatic or asymptomatic. There's that change of I am positive as a parent, but my kids are negative. Can they go to school? So yes, they can go to school. We are universally masked. So students do not need to quarantine, even if there's a positive case in their household, if they're asymptomatic. So once you have one symptom, you then now those children need to do a 5-day quarantine. So there's all these different factors of, are you the positive case? Do you have a positive case in your house? Are you asymptomatic? Are you symptomatic? And then what are those symptoms? Are they getting better? There's a lot of different components to determine, are you a 5-day person or are you a 10-day person? It gets very confusing. It is case by case. And so I say this to staff all the time. On day 5, call me, let's process it and see if you can come out on day 6. Or do you need to do the full 10 days? I'd like Jody to kind of jump in here. I don't know if what else I'm missing there.
I think you summed it up as simply as it can be summed up, but you're right. It's case by case, and it's everybody's different, and there are lots of questions that we ask. And people may wonder why we're asking them, but it's because we're trying to figure out, okay, so what day is day 0, and where do we count from, and how can we get you back to school? Back to before, someone had asked about educating parents about when they call in, and we do have a system in all of our schools that if someone calls in and basically leaves a message saying COVID, that message gets sent right to the nurse, and then the nurse calls and follows up so that we can do some of that education and follow up to ask some of those questions that we need to ask. But it is complicated, and yeah, you said it probably as simply as it can be said.
So I think another piece too is what's day 5, like what's the 5th day. So it's at day 0. So if, we've had 2 siblings test, one's asymptomatic, one is symptomatic, their day 0 is very different. So if you're asymptomatic, it's your test date. If you're symptomatic, it's your onset of your symptoms. And so we have to first determine what your day 0 is. So then the next day is day 1, what day 5 is. So that's always like the first step is it symptoms or asymptomatic? What is your day 0 to what would be your day 5 to check in to see if you could do a come back at day 6, or are you a 10-day quarantine? So there's a little bit more follow-up now in terms of 5 or 10. And I mean, it is good for kids to be able to come back sooner, but we definitely need to check in with students and staff prior to releasing them out of that 5-day quarantine.
And having gone through this myself as of late, it is very convoluted because, for instance, my wife tested positive before I did, but I was out of quarantine before she was. It's a very interesting thing. I would put this out to our parents in the group. I think the quarantine rules are really difficult. Would it be helpful when we make communication after this meeting to kind of at least attempt to explain the quarantine rules as part of, or quarantine guidelines or whatever they are, as part of our communication? I mean, they're almost as clear as mud to some degree, but I think, would it be helpful to have that as part of the communication?
I would say yes.
I think if the CPT or the school board could put together, the proposed way that it should be done to limit the amount of missed school. So like Kathy was saying, you know, test early, therefore the result is your child will be, we can identify day 0 quickly. They can get over their symptoms because, you know, Omicron just went through my house too. And it's like, it's short. Like the quarantine is probably too long at 5 days. If there's a way that they can shorten it, you know, for families and they understand that, they'll be less irate when they get to the end and realize, oh, I still got to be home. What do you mean? Because they didn't understand that up front.
Eric?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think the more transparency and the easier we can break it down for people, the better. I think a lot, following the school board very closely over the last year, I think the same thing happened with the mask mandate when we went to universal masking. And I don't think a lot of people truly understood what the goal of the masking was. It was coming down from the DOE and the way they presented it. And if we do universal masking, then we can do this. And if we don't do that, then we have to do this. So I think a lot of what I heard in the community was people just don't understand it at times, and they're not hearing it from the RSU 4. And I think the more information we give to people, information can be power.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly include that when we do communication. And I think Ames is, you know, from my perspective, Ames is correct. Being able to detail to parents, you know, first of all, we don't make these rules. You know, they're not ours. They're done for us. We're told what they are, but also, you know, how do you come out of quarantine? What are the avenues by which to do, and what does quarantine look like these days? So I appreciate that feedback, because I think it's important, you're right, to be able to communicate those things effectively. So anything else related to quarantine? Questions, comments, concerns,
I have a
thoughts?
question, and it might be, I was looking at the agenda, and stop me if it's going to be covered in the mask breaks, but the KN95, the federal shipment, will RSU 4 be getting any, like with the universal masking, will RSU 4 have any access to that? It was just, I think, just announced either today or yesterday.
It was announced today. What I was told this morning, and I forgot to tell Kathy about this, what I heard this morning was that we may have access to that. So and this is totally fine to ask this now. We, you know, in the beginning of the pandemic, the federal government, the state government, the National Guard deployed all of this PPE. I mean, it was just overwhelming to some degree. I mean, Kathy can speak to the shipments we got from the National Guard. We've got a ton of stuff in storage. We were promised at the beginning the N95, KN95 masks. We I don't believe we ended up getting more than one box. Did we, Kathy? I think.
No, only one.
Yeah.
Because they have to be fitted. So
yeah,
that's the problem with that. I know the DOE said you know, I think with Maine, they were looking at the DOE ordering them and then distributing them to the district versus the district trying to do the pig scramble to grab their own procurement of masks. So at this point, I think we're going to have to wait till the DOE goes through that process of what that will look like. But yeah, like the N95s actually have to be fitted to the individual. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging than just distributing them.
Right. And so to answer your question, Betsy, we don't know. We've been told a couple of times, I've heard a couple of times that there will be more shipments coming, but we've been told that right along and haven't seen a thing. So we've actually used some of our COVID relief funds to keep more PPE on hand. We got plenty of it now. We actually got a little low here recently, and we put in another order. But you know, that Kathy brings up a good point about the fit test. I think Jody, all the nurses were fit, correct, or had the opportunity to be fit at one point.
Yeah, we all had the opportunity to be fit tested and provided with 5 N95 masks.
Yeah. That was early on. I think there's been anything else. Have you seen anything on the nurse listserv at this point?
No, there hasn't been any chatter about that.
Yeah. So I've actually looked into purchasing some KN95 masks, but they're incredibly hard to come by right at the moment. And as with all things, as you all know, when demand goes up, supply goes down, and some of our larger companies decide it's a wonderful opportunity to make a bunch of money. And so they have, the market is pretty stretched thin right at the moment. I keep an eye on those things to see. I get probably 20 emails a day from different companies that want to sell us all sorts of things. And so, you look at it, we're selling KN95 masks, but then you read the fine print and they're not really KN95 masks. They're KNPs or something. I mean, it's a very interesting phenomena that's come up, but certainly we're watching that closely, Betsy, because if we can get stuff for free, we're going to take it. I will say some of the things that we got in those shipments of federal procurement. I mean, I know our teachers can talk about some of the god awful hand sanitizer that we got, that we actually had to cut. It was 80%, which is not healthy necessarily. So we had to cut it down. We got, I'm trying to think some of the other things, some of the worst disinfecting wipes I've ever seen. And we have more disinfecting wipes that are dry, containers that came to us dry from the federal government. So we're watching those things pretty closely for sure.
I will say we had a meeting with Dr. Shaw, I want to say last Monday. I feel like, so the 10th, January 10th, and he did say that the PPE that the schools got for masks is appropriate. So even though they're saying like, yes, like KN95s, whatever, he's like the school masks are fine in terms of for mitigating purposes. So, still not approving gaiters, face shields, definitely want to like double up if you can. But he did rest assured that what the schools have procured so far is going to work at this point. So it wasn't that we couldn't have school unless we had those masks. So just.
On that mask comment too, something else to think about is anybody with facial hair wearing an N95 or a K95, it's useless. So, you think about everybody in high school who's trying to grow a beard or can grow a beard or can't grow a beard or wants to grow a beard. And now you put them on an N95 and they say, oh, great, I'm wearing N95. Zero benefit from that. We deal with it all the time at the hospital. You go into the OR and you deal with a COVID patient, you have to be clean shaven if you're going to be wearing an N95 to get the protection from it. Other than that, there is no benefit.
Well, and I learned that too, Eric. Like I said, my wife is a nurse and she works in express care now, and she had to be fit tested. And part of the fit testing piece was, could she smell through the KN95? She actually has to wear a 3M respirator now because she could smell through the KN95 or the K90, whatever, the N95, no matter what. And she actually can smell through the respirator too. So it's a very, very interesting thing for sure. Anything else related to quarantine? Okay, at-home tests. Kathy and I talk a lot about at-home tests, don't we?
Sorry, the ladies were just checking in. So at-home tests are becoming more readily available, as you probably know. So at the very beginning just even the beginning of the school year, we were not accepting home tests. One, because we were having to report every single positive case, and the CDC did not recommend or recognize, I guess is the word, at-home test. However, since mid-December, it has been, as the cases have spiked, it's harder and harder to get tests. And so we have found that people are taking longer than, even when it was a 10-day quarantine, they could sometimes have symptoms and then they would get a test and the test results would take 3 to 5 days to come back. And at that point, their 10 days might have been up and they still don't know if they're positive or not. So it was taking quite a long time to get test results, or they were taking it a home one. We knew they were positive, but we needed another test to verify that so we could do the report. At this point in time, we are accepting positive home tests. So for example, we need to verify the at-home test of like who took it. So one of the things that we've been asking is for example, if staff became positive, they take a picture of the home test and they write their name, their birth date, the day that they swabbed it, and then they sign it verifying that they follow the directions of the home test and that it is indeed their test. And so at-home tests, we do not do a CDC report. It has been going on our dashboard so we can see, because it would then allude us to that outbreak status piece. But in terms of absences, we don't have to do the Google form to the DOE CDC. So at this point in time, this would be a major change. I think it's with the where it's readily available for parents, and now Biden made it possible that every household is going to can get up to 4. I think it's important that we accept a home test, especially on when you get to that day 5 and you need to take an antigen test to see if you can get out of quarantine for day 6. It would be really who of us to accept at-home test.
I think that's a point, Kathy, that we need to maybe potentially, we're accepting them for positive cases, but to remove themselves from quarantine, how do we feel about that? I think I'd like to hear from everybody regarding that. I mean, Ames brought up earlier, this is a way for students to exit quarantine. I don't know. We're accepting them for positive tests, but I'd love to hear feedback on accepting at-home tests to get out on day 5. Thoughts, anyone?
You have to, based on the SOP. It has to be antigen test. I'm trying to find it. It's on page. It says on page 2, if okay, here you go. If a student, so it's on page 2, goes into 3. If a student's teacher or staff have access to a test and wants to test during isolation, the best approach is to use an antigen test toward the end of day 5 isolation period. Follow the US CDC guidelines for details on testing. If the test result is positive, continue to isolate until day 10. If the test result is negative, isolation can end on or day after day 6, and the student, teacher, or staff can return to school.
Fair enough.
But at that point, we've already had a positive. We've already had a positive home test or a positive PCR. The negative would just to get them out of quarantine. We're not accepting negative tests. We're just accepting positive home test at that point to identify. And then that would, day 5 would be that follow-up that we would want to have them connect with the nurse or the school anyway to make sure that we know if they're clear to come back or not. We need to know if they're having resolving symptoms as well as test negative. So that is in part of the SOP. It's just more about, are we accepting the positive home test? I think it's another communication that we need to do, because we have some people that take the test and throw it out. We need to have more documentation than that.
Jody?
So I heard a couple things in that conversation. And I guess my question is are you thinking of requiring a negative test to get out of quarantine? Because it's not required. The SOP says if they have access and if they want to, but it's not required.
So that would be that's a CPT decision.
That's a decision of this group, if it would be required.
Is it just resolving symptoms? Who determines that? Is it you have to check in with the nurse first to come back? Is it I have to show a negative test? Like, what is that? Day 6, get out of jail free, get out of quarantine.
So Kathy, can you actually show a negative test after?
Yes.
So it will, even
It
though
happens. I've gotten 20.
90 days.
I've gotten 20. So you'll test positive on the PCR and you will have doctors that will say, I am not retesting you. And that's because most of the time they're giving the PCR. But in terms of an at-home antigen, I've received 20 of people that have been in quarantine and have tested negative in order to come back.
I previously were positive.
Yes.
They were positive. Yeah, actually 2 are on this call.
I'll say I'm living proof of that, Ames. I tested positive, and then 5 days, I think it was 6, wasn't it, Kathy? It might have been 6. No, 5. I can't remember. I tested negative on the same test I tested positive. So it does actually work that way. I was kind of surprised.
And
but I
I'm
think-
on day 8 of COVID and I'm still testing positive
Yep.
on antigen. So
Yes, you get a 10-day.
10-day, which is fine.
My wife took the full 10 days. She actually tested negative on day 9. So it's very interesting. Heather?
I just want to clarify. So we have, as a district, we have moved now from not accepting home tests to accepting home tests.
Yeah, and it's part of that is because staff and students could not get in to test. And so if we had a positive test, what was happening was prior to January 11th, we were not accepting home tests. We knew people were positive, but we couldn't contact trace them because we weren't accepting it. So we would go and it was like a week and a half by the time they could get a test. And then we had to go back and contact trace. It was just really a nightmare in terms of the time frame. And by the time we could get everything, it was like the 10 days. So it's like, well, we couldn't tell parents that they were a close contact because they were already on day 10. So we really kind of out of a need of, there was lack of testing out there. There was more readily available for at home. We had to make the switch. And then last week it made it possible.
And I will say testing outside of home tests has become very difficult. You know, when I was positive at home, I thought, well, I'll probably go get one somewhere else. It was going to be 8 days before I could get in to get a PCR anywhere. I know that Maine General Express Care yesterday alone in Waterville processed 82 swab and go patients. It's pretty crazy at this point. So I think the big question that I hear right now is, and Jody said it, the SOP does not require a negative test at the 5 days to come back. Am I correct in what you were saying, Jody? What's that?
It says if a student, that's where like Jody and I were like, well, that's not helpful. So if you have access to it, then take the test. If you don't, then do you call the school and then the school with the school nurse make the determination? Like I don't.
If the RSU 4 didn't provide the test, I would say they don't have access to it. I wouldn't assume that every home is going to have a test to get their student back to school.
I would agree with you. Yep.
That is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Megan?
So kind of to mirror on that. So we're dealing with COVID right now in my house. 2 of my 4 kids are positive. I work for the city of Lewiston and I drove around literally all day yesterday looking for testing, just to get them tested. So I think that requiring necessarily a negative test to go back to school is going to be hard with the lack of tests available. The whole city of Lewiston, other than one store, was completely out of tests. I ended up having to send somebody out to Lisbon, and then I had to find the one store in Lewiston that had 4 tests available. And again, I have 4 kids in my house. I can only buy 4 tests at a time. So I could only test my kids. And then I had to get a test at my employer, but we were out of tests as well. So they just sent me home for the 5-day quarantine, assuming that, you know, I very well could have it. So I think that we need to look at that as well. Again, like everybody else has said.
Marco?
Just thinking logistically for Jody and then the other nurses in the school district, what does it look like, you know, if we did, and I say this, require, you know, a test to return to school after day 5, you know, just keeping track of that. So, you know, obviously we keep track of the positive cases, but then the students would return to school. You know, I do agree that not everybody has access to tests. And, you know, as you said, Megan, just a moment ago, trying to find tests at this point in time is extremely difficult. You know, where we have, you know, I say this, a stockpile, you know, of tests, but not really knowing obviously how many we have throughout the district. does it become too much of a burden on school personnel, students, community members, families, so on and so forth, to monitor all of that, to make sure that, when students return on day 6, if you will, or day 5, they're having a test administered at the school to determine whether or not they continue to be there or they go home.
Well, I can start to some of that, Marco, because I don't actually know that we do have a stockpile. So Jody can speak to this some. I order the tests for the district, but as of late, those shipments have all of a sudden slowed down. Would you agree, Jody?
They have slowed down, and there is lots of chatter on the nurse listserv that schools are running low and running out of tests. And we're still pool testing. So when we have a positive pool come back, there was some change to that guidance, so we could triage and only test the kids that are symptomatic, but then you're going to not find your asymptomatic positives if you do that. And when you have 5 pools come back that are positive with 10 people in each pool, and you're testing 50 people at a whack, we're going to deplete our test supplies, and then not have them to be able to test symptomatic students in school and or those pools. The other thing to think about is having sick people come into our schools to get tested. So I guess if their symptoms are improving and they're fever free, then they're not necessarily sick anymore. But I don't know. I just, having people that have been in quarantine come into school to be tested, I think logistically is going to be very difficult. And I don't know if that's where we want to go.
So we haven't gotten the shipment from the December order yet. One of the boxes on Friday that we opened at the high school did not have the liquid. So that meant all 100 of the, or whatever, was useless because we couldn't actually, so we actually had the test, but we didn't have the liquid to actually do the test. So I was trying to call Abbott Lab to see if we get a vial, because the vials are so small compared to the amount of tests that we have. So there are issues with that regard. But
I know I've ordered 1,600 tests since, what was it, right before Christmas break, Jody? And I don't believe any of those have come in yet.
We got the 1 box, right?
And it wasn't a full order, correct? Because one of the orders was 600 and one of them was 1,000. So
we haven't gotten either one of those.
Yeah. So Amy?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the fact my background's I'm an immunologist. So I just wanted to highlight, on top of all of the practical things that people have brought up that are really good points about this testing and the 5 days, is that we know from the science the 5 days got put in place because we know that in most cases, you're most infectious, you're most apt to share this with other people, which is funny words, but it is in that 5-day period, in the first few days of being infected, especially if you're symptomatic. I think that if you're symptomatic still at 5 days, you probably should stay home anyway. But if you're asymptomatic or your symptoms have dropped off, I don't think, based on the science, that a test to test out a negative test is absolutely necessary, and it's kind of wasting resources. And that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Just a couple of thoughts, and certainly, Amy, I'm hearing, what you're saying. From a teacher standpoint, in my classroom, I spend most of my day communicating with students about putting their masks on and keeping them on correctly. And so having students who might come to school before they should, because there certainly is a reason for parents to get back to work and their kids to go back to school. I struggle with that idea of kids coming to school without some sort of evidence that they're ready. Just because a great deal of my day right now is reminding kids again and again to wear their masks over their nose. It's a constant source of frustration of mine, and I try and be polite as possible, but I'm losing that patience. And I would just say also, bring the kids into the school. I certainly understand they're sick. My wife at her job had to test in the parking lot for a few days. She ended up actually having 4 antigen tests come back negative and a PCR test come back negative. Her 5th antigen test ended up coming positive, even though, so 5 tests over 5 days, basically. And so she wasn't in the building at all until the PCR test came back negative. She was in the building and found out she was actually positive afterwards. And it's just a frustrating situation. And I think, people can be quite healthy, can get symptoms afterwards, or rather be symptomatic before they know, and just ends up being a little messy. But again, I just worry about kids coming into the school and not wearing their mask correctly, or also being around other kids who don't wear their masks correctly as well.
I just want to say there are some contingencies about that returning on day 6 through 10 that I think it's worth having a conversation as we're, it's tied to this. It's also tied to the mask breaks. But if you are returning to school and you tested positive, it's required that you're masked 100% of the time. So those students are not supposed to have a mask break. They're not technically supposed to be eating with other children because they are still, contagious in some ways, or still have the virus in them. So there was supposed to be a school contingency plan, as we're talking about, until they're done that isolation. So as Dr. Shaw said, to the best of our abilities. And so that is like a big piece that, having a child that is positive sit in a different place if they're eating their snack or eating their lunch, and having a different plan for them when they're actively eating. So that is part of that. But, as an educator, there's other stigmas to that piece, but it's supposed to be on day 6 through 10, you are masked 100% of the time if you're coming back. So Amy, your hand is still up. Was there something else you wanted to add? Okay, Ames.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask the same question, Kathy. What's the tolerance level for discriminatory treatment for the students who are returning? Lunchroom, providing N95 that has to be worn for the next 5 days. Are we really going to put on the school board actually a discriminatory treatment of students when they return?
And so I think that's where we're going to go the best of our abilities. At this point, we have so many cases to police, like who's in the day what. I mean, that's not possible. So we're, I think, at a point of, if we're allowing them to return, we're allowing them to return in school as school goes. Unless CPT really wants to dive that in and gives us a different direction. But our best of ability is, if we're saying that they are resolving their symptoms or asymptomatic, then they can come to school, and we're okay with that. I think that's the direction we need to go, unless this team wants to go a different direction.
Eric? Oh, you're still muted, Eric.
2 things I was wondering about. One of the things that's a big trouble with the at-home test is the sensitivity and specificity of the home test. So they're very specific at ruling in the disease, but they're not very sensitive to ruling the disease out, which is one of the challenges that we've run into, which is why you can have 3 or 4 home tests that you test negative for, test negative for, test negative for, and then all of a sudden you test positive for, or you test positive for the PCR test. So I don't know if that really affects whatever decision or whatever kind of judgment we decide to pass along. Is number one. And the other piece being, is there anything to looking at symptoms? So although the student or the staff member may be past their 5-day quarantine, but on day 6 or 7, they're still symptomatic. So are they still allowed to come back day 6 if they're symptomatic, or are they still considered to be quarantined? And I was just trying to reread a piece from page 1 to 2 in regards to laboratory testing, where it said something along the lines of, approach is to use antigen tests toward the end of 5-day isolation period. If the test result is positive, then they isolate till day 10. So that's if they're just in an asymptomatic close contact, I guess. That's how I'm understanding it. Or am I reading it wrong? If a student has access to,
If you're infected.
if you're infected. So it doesn't, so then my understanding of that is day 6 doesn't mean they automatically come back.
Correct.
They have to be asymptomatic to come back.
Resolving symptoms. So as long as you're, so if I had a hacking cough that was like, couldn't even get through a sentence, we've had those two, I am like, now don't even need my inhaler on day 6. That's a resolving symptom.
Okay, so it's just resolving is all we're looking for.
Right, but for some parents that.
Right, it's a gamut.
Right, and which symptom, it's like different than what our symptom, used to have high risk symptoms, low risk symptoms. Now it's just every symptom is lumped together.
Thanks.
Okay.
More confusing than it is simple.
So I guess what I'm hearing is there some, so I will remind you all process-wise. So process-wise, this group only makes recommendations to the board. This group does not make decisions. And so, the SOP does not require a test to return. However, we've had some conversation about that. Is there a wish to require a negative test to return? And if it's still positive, do the full 10 days or not? So that would require a vote, and a reminder that would be a recommendation to the board. The board then would take that up from this group. That would require a motion here, and then a motion, a second, and a vote. So certainly if there is someone that wants to do that, we can, but that will be up to the will of the group. Jeremy?
I was just going to say, I don't necessarily see that a test would be based on the discussion we've had, but some sort of formal process that might deal with the student going to see the nurse before resuming classes. Something that would be formal enough. There is certainly a benefit for parents to minimize, or the students to minimize their actual symptoms. If it means getting out of the house, and we've had that, before COVID, it certainly happened as well, where students would be sent to school unwell for a number of reasons. And I guess I would hate to see that taken advantage of here. So for me, some sort of formal process, it may not necessarily be a test, but something that would be seen by an objective adult.
Thoughts around that?
I agree with that, like seeing a nurse, or just to make sure that the kids are asymptomatic. I mean, as somebody who teaches everyone in the whole school, I think that's important way, like some kind of process for when they come back.
Crystal?
Having it formally known too for like the staff. So what Kathy was just saying about the 6 to 10 day back after being on quarantine, it's a strict no mask break. You kind of have to eat like by yourself. Like none of that information was known to any teacher that I'm aware of, definitely at the middle school level anyways. So for example, we just last week, I had 2 kids whose parents tested positive, but they were in school and they were given all the freedoms like every other student. And then we had another kid come back after her 5 days was up, and still none of that. So I definitely think open communication about these kids coming back and kind of where they are at, just so we teachers can really reinforce the rules that are out there for us to stay safe.
So I just want to be clear, Crystal, in both those situations, the kids could come back and still do school as school. It was a recommendation during the change that happened last Wednesday that if they do come back early, that we would try to tighten up our protocols. Again, we don't make those changes unless CPT reviews those kind of things. Because if it's an if and a recommendation, those are the things that the CPT has a conversation about. If it's a requirement from the CDC, we just follow that.
Okay, and so all of this just started on Wednesday.
On Wednesday. So this like recommendation, like if they have a home test is a recommendation, that's why CPT is having that conversation. If they can isolate during lunchtime is a recommendation, that's why CPT is talking about it. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So
Yes.
the other piece is those are requirements, and this is like the protocol. We're following that right from the get-go.
Right.
Okay.
Jody?
So I have a couple things. Back to what Jeremy was saying. So I just have to wonder what that nurse visit's going to look like. Because if they're coming back and they're fever free for 24 hours without the use of fever reducing meds, I can certainly say, did you take anything before you came this morning? And I can take their temperature. And then if it's symptoms improving, if I don't know what their symptoms look like while they were sick, how am I going to know if they're improved? And then back to what Crystal was saying, I think you cleared it up, Kathy, but those were recommendations of kind of moving kids into separate seating and those kinds of things. And I thought I had heard earlier in the meeting that if we're going to allow kids to come back to school, then kids are going to come back to school, and they're going to come and do school like school is. So.
Ames?
Yes, my question was to Jody, if nurses can actually take on the onslaught of students on any given morning that need to report to the nurse's office before they have to go to first class. Is that actually can it even be done?
Well, it's going to depend on the day, and it's going to depend on the number of students. There are certainly days that are more hectic than others, especially like we pool on Wednesdays at the middle school. So Thursdays and Friday mornings can be extremely hectic depending on how many positive pools I have. And I know it's the same way at the other schools because I try to catch those kids before they go to class or call them down right after announcements so that they can be tested before they spend a full day in school to try and identify that positive. So it would depend on the day and it would depend on the number of students, but my concern is how do I determine if a student's symptoms are improving if I don't know what their symptoms look like to begin with?
Would it make more sense, Jody, to have some sort of standardized form that goes home with students describing the illness, how bad was it, and then all the prerequisites that you just determined before they can come back? Like you can't be on painkillers, you can't be taking cough suppressant, you can't be, you have to be lucid, you have to be able to concentrate. Like if you can't meet this criteria, don't come back.
And part of the discussion that I have with parents when I talk to them about kids that are testing positive and talking about when they can come back is, they can come, I say all of those things. I don't know if a follow-up email or a letter would be more helpful to parents. I don't know the best way to get that information out, but I do say, they have to be fever-free for 24 hours without fever-reducing medications. Their symptoms need to be improving and they need to feel well enough to participate in a full school day activity. So they need to be able to come to school and do school. And if they're not feeling well enough to do that, please call me so that I can get them onto the remote learning list and they can continue to access their classes from home if that's not something they can do. But certainly in writing or some sort of follow-up, if that will help.
I think the symptoms are so different for every single person and the severity is so different. I think it would be really challenging to kind of do a flow chart of like, if you have this, then this. Just to kind of bring back the conversation about what we're really like getting to, I heard Andy say like, can we have a motion or whatever, in terms of like understanding what our capacity or what we're recommending in SOP be for parents and schools. I guess my recommendation is these 4 things. One, the student tests positive, either a PCR or at home. Sometimes we get that at school when they're sick. Sometimes we get that through pool testing. Sometimes they get that at home. Sometimes they get it at a doctor's office. So you test positive in some capacity. And then we require, like, if it's at home, we need this documentation or what have you. 2, you contact the school to determine what your day 0 is, because it's different if you're symptomatic or asymptomatic. On number 3, on day 5, you contact the school nurse to determine your isolation period. Do you get to come back on day 6, or are you staying in till day 10? And step 4 would be your return to school date. And then we make sure that school is school. So I guess that would be what I would say from this conversation is what, so I'll repeat that. 1, you test positive, rapid or antigen or PCR. 2, contact the school to determine day 0. 3, day 5, contact the school nurse to determine the length of your isolation period, either a 5-day or a 10-day. And number 4 is you return to school with all full school capacities.
So Kathy, am I hearing you say that's a recommendation you'd like to make to the board?
At this point, listening to the conversation, I feel like that might be an appropriate SOP that we could motion and discuss.
Okay, Marco? Oh, you're muted.
Thanks for the reminder. I appreciate it. I guess I'm curious, Kathy, like, is that conversation, via telephone really any different than the student walking in, to the building? I mean, obviously they're still at home, and maybe it allows for that conversation that Jody, was talking about, being concerned, not knowing what the symptoms were. Are they improving? Are they not improving? I guess
I think it allows us to kind of, 1, do a check-in to kind of see like how far the remote learning is going to happen. 2, are symptoms improving? If, it allows us to do kind of a check-in. We could even put, it's recommended to test, right? And see if they test negative. We could put that recommendation right on day 5. If a test is available, take it. But you must, it's required that you call the school on day 5. So like you could do that, and then that would give some information that could be added as well. But I think checking in with the school prior to showing up is, I think, important.
Thank you.
All right. No other hands up. All right. Anybody else?
I agree with that, Kathy. I think the recommendation of a testing on day 5 available would be appropriate too.
And I'm listening to the staff saying, I really want to make sure that the kids are clear before they're heading into my classroom. So I know, like Jody's like, well, I don't know what they were, but if you're having that conversation on day 1 or 0, right, that they test positive, and you have them 5, then hopefully the nurses have a better understanding what resolving symptoms look and sound like. I don't know. And there might be times where our timeline doesn't work. I mean, there are times where, like, because of our absence, we are not, I'm going to tell you, on the 24th, we're going to get inundated by people reporting positives that when they have not seen us, they're going to walk in and call us. Mondays are really about phone calls and reporting positive cases that they don't report over the weekend. And so there are going to be times where now, okay, so we have now a very long week that we did not have cases. That Monday we're going to have them. And so we're going to have people all over the place on day 5, 7, 2, that morning. So this isn't the perfect timeline, right? If everyone follows that timeline, but we know with COVID, it kind of changes by the time people test, they may like, oh, it's something else and that kind of thing. So I'm just saying this would be like a perfect case scenario. If COVID put in a box, that would be the box I would put it in.
Jeremy.
I was just going to mention earlier, Jody asked about emailing home to parents. Being someone who got quarantined last year 3 times, I think twice I had to email Kathy back the day after to make sure I knew my date was. because in that moment of trying to give the information and he gave information back, I was overwhelmed with all the things I was trying to figure out also in my head of all the other impacts of my life. So I would just encourage, as part of the SOP or whatever we do here, that the information also gets sent home in a written format too.
So we have created a CDC tab in Infinite Campus. That is something like whenever we determine what the standard operating procedures are, we can create a letter, and then the nurses can just literally click it and it will automatically send them a letter when, like, this date you need to call the school, and then these are your 2 possible return to school dates.
All right. If you look in the chat, Christy's been so kind as to write down what was kind of laid out. I actually wrote it down here too. So I'm taking that as I'm encapsulating the conversation here and looking at that. Sounds to me there is some flexibility in the SOP regarding this about what is required, what isn't. It sounds to me like Kathy is proposing that this is the SOP that we propose to the board regarding quarantine procedures. Am I correct, Kathy?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will take that as a motion. Do I have a second on that?
I'd second it.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Any more discussion regarding that?
I have one question, I guess, and maybe it'll be an addition. It's number 3 on the day 5, contact school nurse to determine isolation period. If on that day 5, the student or the staff member is still symptomatic, would it be appropriate to then ask for a negative test? And if they're asymptomatic, then don't worry about the test. But if they are symptomatic, then we can, going to what Jeremy was saying earlier about wanting to have a little bit more testing in the classroom if possible. Is that unreasonable?
I think that was the conversation about the availability of tests. So, the term has been resolving symptoms allow you to come back, because we do have staff on day 10 that still have symptoms. And so it's no different than the day 5. I saw, I don't know how many staff members yesterday that I have one that's on day 30 and are still exhibiting symptoms. So, I think to be asymptomatic could be a very long time for some folks, right? So I think it's really important to say that, like, resolving symptoms, and maybe that, maybe once we get this, we do it and then we send it out to you all so you can kind of like wordsmith it and proofread it or whatever before it goes to the board. But I think resolving symptoms, and then we could do that recommended to test if it's available. We'll use that term, the verbiage that's in the SOP, but you just got to remember you could have symptoms day 10, day 90. It just depends on what your case looked like.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, so we will vote. We'll do this roll call because I think it's important to do that way. So I'll start with Jeremy. Yes or no?
Yes.
Jody?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Megan?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Allie?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Okay, Christy and I don't get votes. Marco?
Yes.
Hannah?
Yes.
Crystal?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
And Ames?
Yes.
All right. That motion carries. So again, reminder of process. We'll type this up, get it out to you to review, but this will be the recommendation that goes for the board to take up. Thank you all for that. I wasn't sure we were going to have anything to vote on today, so that was, I'm glad that we were able to sort that out. All right, moving on, mask breaks. Kathy. I don't remember this one.
No, this is just one of those things that continues to come up, and I think it's an important conversation for CPT. So there's no requirements. So if we were in a meeting with Dr. Shaw, he will say we recommend no mask breaks, only when you're actively eating. But obviously our community has had a lot of conversations regarding mask breaks. So it's just, I think, a really important one to either review the SOP, kind of just talk about to make sure we're all on the same page as we're universally masked. So again, this is a recommendation, conversation at CPT, not a requirement. So.
Okay, thoughts?
Is there a way to tie this into pool testing? Because I think the big concern is, where do the students get their mask breaks? How long are the mask breaks? Are they allowed to be close to each other when they have mask breaks? So if students are enrolled in the pool testing, is there a way to encourage them to be part of pool testing to encourage mask breaks, or is that overstepping bounds?
Yes, I think it kind of goes back into like, how is pool testing any different than what level of vaccination status you are? So it just ends up being in this whole piece. I have students and staff that are in pool testing, but now have tested positive and cannot continue to pool test for 90 days. So would they not be allowed to have a mask break? It would be a lot of policing of like who could or who couldn't. So I'm not quite sure how that would be feasible in terms of like logistics. That's all.
Megan?
I guess the big thing is to decide what mask breaks would look like. I mean, coming from a teacher's standpoint, like in the middle of teaching, do they have to say, okay, you're going to go here, you're going to do your mask break. You guys are going to sit over here and not do your mask break. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I have a 4-year-old and it's like sending her someplace different or away from her friends to do a mask break. I can't imagine what that looks like in class, taking away from teaching. And I've talked to both my kids, and mask break, no mask break. They don't care. They just want to be in school and learning. So I think logistically with teachers, we got to figure out what that looks like for them too. I mean, and where we go from there, and how it takes away from teaching and getting our kids to learn.
Maybe it'd be important for the teachers to share what mask breaks look like in their classrooms and how often that happens.
So I can go first for middle school. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I can go for middle school. So mask breaks happen depending on what the grade level determines. So 5th and 6th grade with the younger kids, they tend to bring them outside for 5 or so minutes each class. And so that when we had 75-minute classes, it was a little better because the classes were long anyways, and they could kind of split them up in half. But now that the 60-minute classes start, taking them out for 5 minutes really means like a 15-minute break. So it becomes taxing on the education piece of it all, definitely. So 7th and 8th graders, we a little older, a little more responsible. They can really handle masks being on, even though we have to constantly remind them, like what Jeremy was saying, constantly reminding them to put their masks on. So we do bring them out on nice days every once in a while. Behaviors permitting. The mask breaks are whenever a kid asks for one during class, they're absolutely welcome to have one at the door. That's kind of be where the mask breaks are. You can just take your mask off for a couple seconds, have a snack or something, and then go back to your seat. So that way you're not missing any learning happening in the room. And especially now in the middle school where all teachers are having duties, lunchtime actually includes a 20-minute recess for all grade levels. So every kid in the middle school is getting a 20-minute recess. So that is definitely taking place of any mask break that could be happening in the classroom, because they're getting that 20-minute lunch and then a 20-minute recess. So it's 40 minutes right there of just like no mask. So that's kind of just what's happening at the middle school.
Jen, how about Carrie Ricker?
I know in the morning, I'm pretty sure their mask break takes place when they have snack time. And then they have 30-minute lunch, 30-minute recess outside. And then they usually have a mask break in the afternoon for like 5 minutes. I think most folks in their grade level classrooms are doing like 5 minutes, half the class, and then 5 minutes the other half. So they're spread out, not right next to each other.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Allie, what about Libby Tozier?
Yeah, I can't speak for every single classroom right now. I can get that info. In our classroom, it's really just snack time, eating time. Sometimes the kids will take them off for their. In pre-K we have a rest time since they're full day, and then we have some kids that will be so cute and just ask, can I take a mask break? And they're just usually separated for a few minutes, and we, keep an eye on them and say, put your mask back up, and that's how it rolls in pre-K.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Dealing with older students, they generally ask in class, but again, we spend so much time trying to get them to wear them properly, or they end up, drinking something all day long that they're, they're not necessarily needing a mask break the same way. They're taking a sip of their water here and there. They're sneaking over their nose. So formalized mask breaks do happen when requested, but they're kind of skirting the issue most of the time anyways.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
So at Servatus Primary, I know that most teachers have really come up with a system that works for their classroom. But what a lot of other teachers have been saying, our students have that 30 minutes at lunch, they have the 30 minutes at recess. We all have our snack time. And then I know in my classroom, when students ask, they find a spot away from other students, take a few minutes and then come back. And then, we do a lot of workshop models. So during that time, when students are working in like smaller groups, sometimes students, like one student each group, will have a break of some sort. But it's pretty consistent with what the other teachers have been saying.
Okay, thank you. Marco, I don't know if you want to talk about anything else regarding the high school mask breaks.
No, I mean, I think Jeremy said it quite well. I mean, we do allow obviously students not to wear their masks while they're actively eating at lunch. And my guess is that when students go to use the restroom, especially because we have a number of single stall restrooms, they're taking their masks off there to take a break. So there's ample opportunity for students to take a break from masks throughout the day.
Kathy?
I was just going to say, so this topic wasn't here because we needed a change. I just think it's one of the conversations that parents bring up pretty regularly. So it's an important topic. I think another thing of awareness that, it is pretty structured, I would say, pre-K 6 of like there's set times and we kind of like facilitate that. But in 7 through 12, it is kind of child initiated more so than in a structured way for the day. So we do, as the teachers alluded to, if their classrooms are done by rows, then it's every other row, or if it's they're in like pods, it's one person per pod. It's kind of like Heather was saying, like in small groups. So we do kind of have already an SOP, but I just thought it was really important, as that seems to be a question that comes up of like, what is that? Is it regularly done? So if there's changes or things that are other concerns that parents have, I think this would be the time to discuss them.
Any thoughts from our parents? No? All right. It's one of the things I've actually heard less about as of late, is max breaks. We've tried to become a little more consistent with that. So that's a good thing. All right, so it is 4:55. We've got about 5 minutes left. I actually have one thing I just wanted to add to the agenda real quick. It's more of an update for all of you. If you remember correctly, the president had put out the executive order for mandatory vaccinations. The Supreme Court has put a stay on that for now. So has Bosch, the OSHA organization. So currently that is on hold. I had sent, our staff members will know, I had sent out an email about this, I don't know, a week ago, 2 weeks, a couple weeks ago, maybe, regarding it, but that is on hold at this point. So I check in with our attorneys quite frequently about that, what that looks at, things like that. So that was just more of an update, more than anything else. There are 4 minutes left. Does anybody have anything else? No. Okay, well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. This was a pretty productive meeting for meeting 1. I will just kind of look back at our norms, just processing our norms for a little bit. So, one of the things that I noticed was the respect that we have for each other was pretty fantastic. Obviously, everybody was present because everybody participated. I think, from my perspective, we assumed the best intentions for everyone, and everybody really took a moment to like ideas for a minute. Don't always agree, but I think it was that disagreement was, if there was any, was respectful. So I think we did a great job. So thank you all. Let's see. I don't have a meeting scheduled as of yet, but we certainly will have one in the future, I'm sure, as changes come. Kathy, do we need one on the books next month?
I think it's one of those things that when we know that changes are coming on the horizon, that would be important to get one scheduled. To have a meeting is always never really productive. I would say is that we would create that draft of the things that we recommended here going to the board, but I would send it out to this team first just to kind of do a once over prior to. So just be looking for your in your email to kind of see the document that we would then recommend to the board.
So, my plan is to put that recommendation on our next board agenda, which is next week. So I am finalizing that agenda this week. So we will get that out before next week for you to look at. So, all right. Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening.